I've always prided myself on our steady, reliable life. A life built over 28 years of marriage with Linda, our sanctuary amid the chaos of the world. As I packed my bags for an important conference in Seattle, a nagging feeling crept in, something I couldn't quite place. Normally, our departures were filled with warm, lingering goodbyes, little promises of reunion, and even playful teasing about who would miss whom more. Today, however, Linda's farewell was curt and distant, devoid of our usual tenderness. I couldn't shake the sensation that something was amiss. I had been looking forward to this conference for months. It was a chance to present my research, network with industry experts, and perhaps even bring a bit of renewed excitement back into my life. But as I stepped out of our home, a shadow of uncertainty clung to me. Linda had brushed off any discussion of her feelings, insisting that everything was fine, yet her eyes held secrets I wasn't used to seeing. My thoughts were interrupted by the roar of the storm that had suddenly overtaken the skies. I reached the terminal with my mind still half in the world of family memories and half on the promise of a new adventure. However, the storm had other plans. As I waited at the gate, the airline's announcement came through, halting all flights due to severe weather conditions. My heart sank. Not only was my trip cut short, but the unexpected delay forced me to change course entirely. I found myself scrambling for alternative plans. With Seattle off the table, my only option was to return home sooner than expected. I dialed Linda's number repeatedly during the journey, each ring amplifying my growing unease. The phone went to voicemail every single time, and by the time I landed, my anxiety had built up to a palpable level. Driving up to our neighborhood, I rehearsed possible explanations in my head. Maybe she was busy, perhaps caught up in something trivial. Yet as I approached our house, an eerie quiet greeted me. The porch light was off, and the windows were dark. I remembered Linda mentioning that she'd be in the living room watching TV, a room that would normally glow warmly with the soft light of evening shows and quiet chatter. But tonight, it was as if our home had been swallowed by a void. I parked the car and sat there for a few moments, trying to piece together the fragments of the evening. The silence was unsettling. There were no sounds of laughter or television, no murmurs from the kitchen, just an oppressive stillness that made my pulse race. Every instinct told me something was wrong, yet I couldn't pinpoint what exactly had shifted in the familiar rhythm of our life. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and walked up the path to the door, each step echoing my mounting dread. My mind raced with possible scenarios. Had something happened to Linda? Was there an emergency? Or had she simply decided to leave without a word? The usual comfort of routine was replaced by a sudden, inexplicable tension that made the shadows seem to whisper secrets I wasn't meant to hear. Inside, the darkness was nearly complete. I flipped on the light switch, half expecting to see signs of a struggle or an abandoned room that would provide some clue as to what was going on. Instead, I was met with an unsettling quiet, a home that looked untouched, yet something felt profoundly different. The living room, normally a place of warmth and shared moments, was cloaked in an unnatural stillness. My mind churned with questions. I tried calling out for Linda, my voice echoing off the walls, but there was no response. The silence that followed was heavy and oppressive, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Every instinct screamed that I should search every room, check every possible hiding spot, and call out again for her. But despite my inner urgency, a part of me hesitated, uncertain of what I might find. In that moment, standing in the dim light of a house that suddenly felt alien to me, I realized that the normalcy of my world had been irrevocably altered. The unusual departure, the abrupt cancellation of my flight, and now the silence that greeted me at home. All of it pointed to a truth I wasn't ready to accept. Something was deeply, disturbingly wrong. I stood there, heart pounding, grappling with the duality of my emotions. The hope that perhaps there was a reasonable explanation, and the fear that this was the beginning of something far more sinister. The questions swirled in my mind. Where was Linda? What had she been hiding, if anything? And why did our home feel like a stage set for a drama I had never rehearsed? With every step deeper into the house, The weight of uncertainty pressed upon me. I knew that I had to uncover the truth, no matter how unsettling it might be. And as I began to search, I couldn't help but wonder if this was merely the first twist in a narrative that would challenge everything I thought I knew about my life. After the unnerving silence of that first encounter with an empty home, I fumbled for my phone, desperate for any hint that something was off. I dialed Haley's number first. As soon as she picked up, I blurted out, "Hey, do you know anything about a surprise your mom was planning?" She mentioned something unusual before I left. I could almost hear her confusion on the other end of the line. "A surprise?" "No, Dad, I haven't heard anything." Mom's been her usual self. Her tone was light, casual, completely oblivious to the growing tension that had gripped me moments earlier. Unsatisfied with her response, I redialed Linda's number. This time, the answer was just as ambiguous as before. "I'm here, watching a show," she replied, her voice as nonchalant as if nothing unusual had occurred. I could hear the faint background hum of a TV in the distance, but it did little to allay my rising unease. The casual tone of her voice didn't match the emptiness I'd encountered when I walked through our darkened living room. Something wasn't adding up. Not ready to let my concerns fester unchecked, I decided to get a second opinion, one from her workplace. I had always admired Linda's dedication at the advertising agency, and perhaps a quick call to her office might provide some clarity. I reached out, and after a few rings, her colleague Douglas answered. Our conversation started off as a routine check, but then Douglas let slip something that sent a jolt through me. "Actually, Linda took a week off," he mentioned casually, as if discussing the weather, completely unaware of the gravity of the revelation. A week off? That was entirely at odds with the tight schedule I'd known her to keep, especially given the current demands of her job. I pressed for details, trying to mask the tremor in my voice. "A week off? When did she mention this to anyone?" Douglas hesitated for a moment before answering. "I'm not entirely sure, but I think she mentioned it in passing." "It's odd, though, because she never mentioned it to you, did she?" My mind raced with questions. A week off could explain her uncharacteristic brevity in our goodbye, but it clashed with the claim that she was home watching TV. Had she fabricated the story? And if so, what was she really up to? I ended the call feeling even more isolated in a web of half-truths. The clear discrepancies between what I'd seen, what Linda had said, and now Douglas's unexpected revelation left me feeling betrayed and confused. Was this all just an elaborate ruse? I couldn't shake the sinking feeling that Linda was hiding something that could upend the entire foundation of our life together. As I sat alone in the quiet of the house, my thoughts spiraled. Every conversation, every silence, every slip of the tongue now felt like a breadcrumb leading me into a labyrinth of secrets. The once familiar space felt alien and filled with whispers of deception. Had I been too trusting? Or was there something more sinister at play? The revelation of this lie wasn't just about a missed week at the office. It was about the possibility that the woman I'd spent nearly 3 decades with had been living a double life. And as I grappled with these thoughts, a chilling realization began to take shape. The quiet, unassuming facade of our everyday life was now crumbling, revealing layers of intrigue and hidden truths that I had never imagined. With my heart pounding and mind reeling, I knew I had to dig deeper. The safe, predictable world I had known was slipping away, replaced by a mystery that threatened to upend everything. The next steps were unclear, but one thing was certain. I couldn't let this lie go unanswered. My search for the truth had only just begun. After my phone call with Douglas left me reeling, I knew I had to take matters into my own hands. With trembling fingers, I opened the Find My Phone app, a tool I'd rarely needed until now, and activated the location tracking feature. The screen blinked, and there it was. Linda's phone was at a luxurious estate near the ocean, in one of those upscale neighborhoods I'd only seen in magazines. The realization that she was so far away sent a cold shiver down my spine. Without wasting another minute, I started the drive. The journey took nearly 3 hours, the traffic crawling along as if reluctant to deliver me to the truth I dreaded yet desperately needed. Every minute on the road was filled with a heavy mixture of anticipation and sorrow, my thoughts oscillating between painful memories of our decades together and the unknown that awaited me at this estate. When I finally arrived, the sight of the property took my breath away. A sprawling mansion encircled by a high, imposing fence that seemed to guard its secrets fiercely. The grandeur of the place was undeniable, its immaculate lawns and modern architecture standing in stark contrast to the turmoil roiling inside me. I circled around, determined to get a closer look, and found that the only plausible approach was from the beach side. The soft hum of the ocean and the gentle breeze offered a deceptive calm as I made my way along the shoreline. I parked my car at a discreet distance and crept along a narrow path lined with tall trees that swayed in the wind. Their branches provided the perfect cover as I positioned myself behind them, eyes fixed on a second-story window of the mansion. The dimming light of the afternoon made it difficult to see every detail, but what I did catch was enough to shatter what little hope I had clung to. There in that secluded room was Linda. She sat comfortably on a plush sofa, her expression relaxed and almost serene, a stark contrast to the anxious woman I'd always known. Beside her were two men, each exuding an air of confidence and affluence. One of them held a glass of expensive champagne, the delicate bubbles sparkling in the light, while the other reached out with a tenderness that was both intimate and deliberate. The way they touched her, the subtle smiles they exchanged, and the overall ambience of indulgence spoke volumes. Every detail etched itself into my memory. The glint of the champagne flute, the soft murmur of laughter mingling with the clink of ice in the glasses, and the way Linda's eyes occasionally met theirs with a familiarity that wasn't mine. I felt like an intruder in a private world, peering through a window into a life that I had never been a part of. My heart pounded in my ears, each beat echoing the realization that the woman I had loved for nearly 3 decades had secrets I could never have fathomed. The scene was surreal, almost cinematic in its precision. It wasn't just an encounter of infidelity. It was a carefully curated display of luxury and intimacy, a narrative that unfolded in slow motion before my eyes. As I watched, a mix of emotions surged through me: betrayal, disbelief, and an overwhelming sorrow that threatened to drown me. The distance between us, both physical and emotional, had never seemed so vast. I stayed hidden behind the trees, grappling with the shards of a life I thought I knew. Every minute stretched into an eternity as I weighed the gravity of what I was witnessing. Linda's laughter, the gentle touches, and the shared glances painted a picture of a reality where I was no longer welcome, a reality that starkly contradicted the warmth and familiarity of our past. In that moment, the beach, the mansion, and even the serene ocean became part of a twisted tableau that I couldn't escape from. The truth was now laid bare in front of me, and with it came the painful understanding that my marriage, our shared dreams, and the life I had built were all entwined in a web of deception. I knew that whatever I did next, nothing would ever be the same. The hunt for the truth had led me to this point of irreversible revelation, and there was no turning back. The shock of the scene made my legs buckle, and I lost my grip on the tree branch I'd been using as cover. In a flash, I was tumbling to the ground. Pain seared through my body as I landed hard on the ground, but the impact was nothing compared to the emotional blow. Lying there for a moment, I allowed the raw surge of betrayal and desperation to pass through me. I couldn't afford to be incapacitated. Not now, when every second counted. Gritting my teeth against the throbbing pain, I pushed myself upright and let my mind regain focus. I needed a plan, a way to both stall her further and set a trap for this betrayal that had unraveled my life. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed Linda's number. When the call went to voicemail, I spoke quickly, carefully rehearsed words that masked the turbulence in my voice. Due to a strong storm, the flight was turned back. I'll be home in 40 minutes. I pressed send and waited, listening to the silent hum of my heartbeat in the distance. I knew that message would send ripples into her carefully constructed facade. Almost immediately, I heard a commotion behind me, a car door slamming, hurried footsteps. From a nearby window, I could see Linda, her face pale and eyes wide with panic as she scrambled to get dressed. I could only imagine her calling out hurried goodbyes to the man who had been with her mere minutes ago, his figure lingering in the background as she dashed toward her car. The sound of tires screeching on pavement cut through the air as she drove off at breakneck speed. That image of her fleeing, as if trying to outrun the consequences of her own deception, was both heartbreaking and enraging. I took a deep, steadying breath and knew what I had to do next. Grabbing my phone once more, I dialed the police. My voice was low, almost measured, as I reported a drunk driver on the road. Every word felt like a calculated step in a twisted dance of retribution. The minutes crawled by as I waited in my car, each second amplifying the mix of adrenaline and sorrow coursing through me. It wasn't long before I saw flashing lights in the distance, police cruisers making their way down the road. Approximately 20 minutes later, a patrol car pulled up alongside Linda's fleeing vehicle. I watched through my windshield as officers moved swiftly to intercept her, their presence a stark contrast to the chaos of the moments before. In that instant, a part of me felt a grim satisfaction, a sense that her web of lies was beginning to unravel. The consequences of her actions were no longer hers alone to bear. As I sat in the quiet hum of my parked car, I realized that this was only the beginning of a reckoning that would expose every hidden truth, every deceit woven into the fabric of our life. And while the pain of betrayal cut deep, I felt a resolute determination to see this through, no matter how harrowing the road ahead might be. Returning home was like stepping into a void. Every room held memories of what once was a life that now felt like a carefully constructed illusion. I walked through the door with numb determination, my mind already racing ahead to the decisions that needed to be made. With each item I packed, it felt as if I was shedding layers of the past, trying to reclaim a future that had long been out of reach. I moved methodically, gathering belongings into boxes and suitcases, every clink and rustle echoing the finality of our decades together. I left behind a home that was once our sanctuary, each room now a silent witness to betrayal. Without looking back, I drove to a hotel where I could regroup, away from the painful familiarity of a place that was no longer mine. That night, as I lay awake in the unfamiliar bed of a hotel room, the weight of everything pressed in on me. I had a lot to do, and my mind was already organizing the steps to sever the ties that had bound me for so long. Sleep eventually came fitfully, punctuated by restless dreams of the life I was leaving behind. The next morning dawned with a steely clarity. I sat at a small table in the hotel lobby, my hands trembling slightly as I made the calls that would set the final wheels in motion. One by one, I closed all our joint accounts. I withdrew over $750,000 from my savings, a staggering sum that, in some twisted way, symbolized the end of an era and the beginning of a new, uncertain chapter. Every transaction was a small act of liberation from the web of deceit that had ensnared our lives. I filed for divorce that very day, in a calculated move designed to avoid the labyrinthine legal battles that might come. I decided to leave the house to Linda. It wasn't about forgiveness or understanding. It was about cutting through the clutter of bitterness with a clean, decisive break. The house, with all its memories and echoes, would remain hers, but I would reclaim my identity and my future. The hardest part came next, facing the children. With a heavy heart, I gathered Nate and Haley in the quiet of the living room one evening. The truth tumbled out, raw and unfiltered, as I explained everything. The deceit, the betrayal, the discovery of a life that I no longer recognized. Nate, ever the steady rock, listened intently before expressing his support with a firmness that warmed me in the midst of the coldness of it all. His words reassured me that perhaps, in some way, the foundation of honesty could still be salvaged. Haley, on the other hand, was caught in a storm of conflicting emotions. Her eyes were wide with disbelief, and as she spoke, her voice trembled. She tried to justify her mother's actions, defending the woman who had once been the center of our family universe. Her need to protect Linda clashed painfully with the undeniable truth I was laying bare. I could see the inner turmoil as she wrestled with her own loyalties. And though it pained me, I knew this was a crossroads from which there was no simple return. In that moment, our family fractured into parts that no longer fit together. I felt a profound sorrow for the loss of what we once were. Yet there was also a resolute certainty that this painful dismantling was necessary. The betrayal had shattered our lives into irreparable pieces, but it also cleared the way for a fresh start, a new life built on honesty, however raw and uncertain it might be. With the divorce filed and the finances restructured, I began to focus on rebuilding. The decisions made that day were not just about cutting ties with the past. They were about forging a path forward, however daunting that might be. I knew the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, legal battles, emotional reckonings, and the difficult process of redefining who I was without the comforting, albeit deceptive, familiarity of our old life. As I left the house for what would be the last time, I carried with me both the scars of betrayal and the faint glimmer of hope that someday the pieces of my life might come together to form something new and real. The path was uncertain, the future unwritten, but one thing was undeniable. I was finally free to begin the process of healing, however slow and painful that might be. 4 years had passed since I left behind the wreckage of my former life, a painful, raw severance from a past that had once defined me. Denver had become my refuge, a place where I could reinvent myself without the ghost of betrayal looming over every step. I built a new routine, one where each day was carefully crafted to distance me from the memories I once cherished and the hurt that had reshaped my world. Then, unexpectedly, she appeared. I first learned that Linda had tracked me down, her tenacity undimmed by time or regret. I caught wind that she was waiting near the office building where I worked, her figure lingering on the sidewalk as if hoping for a second chance to speak. When I caught a glimpse of her tear-streaked face through the glass doors of the lobby, I felt an old sting of unresolved emotion. But I wasn't ready to face the past. Not after all I had fought to leave behind. I avoided her that day, slipping into the anonymity of my workday, leaving her standing alone in a swirl of uncertain hope. That evening, as I returned to my modest Denver apartment, I wasn't prepared for what awaited me inside. The door opened to reveal a scene so meticulously orchestrated it might as well have been a final act in an elaborate play. Standing in the hallway was Carla, a striking 35-year-old Spanish woman with dark, compelling eyes and a quiet confidence that immediately set her apart. Beside her was a little girl, no more than 4, whose bright, curious gaze darted around the room. In that moment, I presented a carefully crafted facade, the daughter of a man who had finally moved on, a symbol of a new life that had been built in defiance of the past. My heart, once shattered and fragile, had been pieced together with deliberate resolve. This staged new family was my final, decisive move to ensure that Linda's reappearance would meet the cold wall of my present, a present where the wounds of the past had nearly healed. I had built a new identity, one where I was no longer defined by heartbreak or betrayal. Later that night, the inevitable confrontation unfolded. Linda, still reeling from the pain of her own making, found her way to my apartment. The moment she saw the tableau before her, the composed image of a family I'd meticulously curated, her facade of defiance crumbled. Tears welled up in her eyes as she began to sob, her apologies tumbling out in broken whispers. "I still love you," she confessed, her voice trembling with regret and longing. I met her tearful gaze with a resolve that had taken years to forge. My voice was steady, almost dispassionate, as I delivered the final blow. "That's in the past," I said, each word measured and deliberate. "Live on like me." In that moment, I was no longer the man who had once clung to a love built on decades of shared history and mutual comfort. I had become someone who embraced the future with unyielding strength, someone who refused to be dragged back into the shadow of old mistakes. As the echoes of my words faded into the silence of the room, I knew that this chapter was finally over. The past had been exorcised, replaced by the hard-won promise of a future that was mine alone to shape. And as Linda retreated into the night, I remained, firm, resolute, and ready to continue living on, unburdened by what had once been. 2 months had passed since I began to piece together the fragments of my shattered life, and then the call came, a cold, unexpected summons to grief. Linda had been involved in a car accident. The report was grim. She had been driving under the influence, in a state of severe intoxication. The news hit me like a tidal wave, stirring a cocktail of sorrow, regret, and a stubborn undercurrent of vindication. The day of her funeral was a blur of muted colors and hushed conversations. I drifted through the ceremony, my heart heavy as I watched family members gather to pay their respects. Amidst the mourning, my eyes caught sight of Victoria, Linda's sister. Unlike the others, Victoria seemed detached, her expression unreadable, her gaze devoid of the sorrow that gripped everyone else. It wasn't that she wasn't present. It was as if her heart had already resigned itself to this tragedy, leaving no room for genuine grief. Seeing her there, so cool and impassive, sparked something dark within me. Over the years, the tangled threads of our past had woven a narrative of betrayal and hidden agendas. Now, Victoria's indifferent stance planted the seed of suspicion. I couldn't help but wonder if her detachment was more than mere shock. Could it be that Linda's downfall wasn't solely the result of her own reckless choices, but part of a larger, more calculated retribution? I began to piece together memories of whispered arguments, subtle hints of a rivalry that had simmered beneath the surface of our family dynamics. Victoria, it seemed, might have seen an opportunity to avenge her own past betrayal, a chance to settle scores that had long festered in the shadows of her marriage. As I walked slowly toward the graveside, the weight of my thoughts was almost as heavy as the grief that pressed in from all sides. I approached the freshly turned earth, each step echoing the loss of a love that had once been so real and tender, and now was irrevocably tainted by deceit. The crisp sound of my footsteps was the only companion as I knelt beside the grave, running my fingers over the engraved letters that bore Linda's name, a name now forever tied to the memory of her final, tragic night. In that quiet moment, with the cemetery's silence enveloping me, the truth settled with a painful clarity. All the betrayals, the lies, and the half-truths had left scars so deep that I knew I would never be able to love as I once had. The open, trusting heart that had once celebrated the beauty of a shared life was now barricaded behind walls built of mistrust and sorrow. I stared down into the darkness of the freshly filled grave, feeling the cold, unyielding reality of irreversible loss. The realization was as clear as it was brutal. I had been irrevocably changed by the cascade of betrayals, not just from Linda, but from the intricate web of family secrets that had enveloped us all. The love that had once defined me had been shattered into pieces too numerous to mend, a love that, despite all its former promise, would forever be tainted by the scars of betrayal and the bitterness of vengeance. In a trembling, almost inaudible whisper, I let the final words fall into the still night air. I will never be able to love like this again. The words, heavy with the cumulative weight of years of pain, were both a lament and a farewell to the life I once knew. As the silence reclaimed its dominion around me, I understood that some losses are not merely about the passing of a person, but about the irrevocable loss of hope, trust, and the capacity to love without fear.